So I am grateful to the organizers to have asked me to speak on the topic history of TIFR and India. At the outset, I reckon that there are at least 10 more persons in the audience today as well as on the Zoom who could have given this talk maybe better than me in view of their longer and deeper involvement in progressing the purposes of TIFR. But anyway, the task is assigned to me and I shall proceed. So, writing down historical facts alone is not enough. They become relevant only if interpreted by one from one's perspective. So this talk will reflect my preferences and prejudices. So it is my comprehension that when Bhabha gave the proposal for TIFR in 1943, he couldn't have imagined the speed at which the TIFR would progress as the times would go by. The Indian independence was very near, but it was not definite how it will come about. And the TIFR managed to progress because Nehru became the head of the interim government and later on the Prime Minister of India, and he had two advisors, Bhatnagar and PMS Beckett. And these two helped propel TIFR as well as atomic energy at a very, very vigorous pace after 1947. So Bhatnagar and Saha had known each other since 1920s. Okay, and the World War II gave them an opportunity to work together in partnership with the other scientists, teacher scientists in India. Bhatnagar had moved from Lahore to Calcutta as a director, first director of both scientific and industrial research, and Saha had moved to Calcutta for in 1938. And so Saha had known Subhash Bose since the presidency days, and when Subhash became the president of Indian National Congress, a planning committee for the Congress was conceived, and Vishwesvaraya was to be chair of that committee, but Saha persuaded Bose to have Nehru as the chairman of the committee. So as the war went, then in sometime in September 1943, a month after Bhabha had proposed the creation of TIFR to J.R.D. Tata in a letter written in August of 1943, Saha masterminded getting together of all the scientists in India for a symposium convened by the National Institute of Sciences. And in that symposium, the Indian scientists drew a concrete framework for research and development for post-war India. Bhabha had also contributed a paper to that meeting, and the proceedings of these meetings were published later in 1944. At the end of the meeting, Saha persuaded Bhatnagar to invite A.V. Hill, Nobel laureate A.V. Hill, the then secretary of the Royal Society, to come to India and interact with the Indian scientists. And this is how the agenda for the post-war development of India was evolved. And Bhabha's efforts were concurrent to it, but not a part of that agenda as it was invented by A.V. Hill later. So who are the contemporaries of Bhabha in the war years? Okay, you can recognize all these names, and 10 of these names along with Bhabha figure in the book titled Bright Sparks, which gives you biographies of 40 scientists of yesteryears. So you can see that Bhabha had many competitors, okay, when he proposed TIFR. Where were these scientists located? Bhabha, of course, was at IISc Bangalore, but this is a list of major centers of research in India, and you can see the research was going on all across India at that time, and this is where all these people were distributed. So this is just the listing of the Council of National Institute of Sciences in 1944. J.C. Ghosh, the then director of IISc Bangalore, was the chairman of the council, and Bhabha and Meghna Saha were members of this council as well. So this is an extract from Venkataraman's book, Venkataraman, who wrote the biographies of Raman and Saha. And in this book, this Venkataraman gave the founders account in 1984 in BRC, and in that he said Subhash became the Congress president in 38, and Saha persuaded Bose to form a planning committee, and he got Saha. He made Saha made Nehru as a chairman of that committee. And then Venkataraman goes on to say that in the atomic energy race in the independent India, Saha lost and Bhabha won, mainly because of his dynamism and vision. Saha was equally visionary, but Saha was 16 years younger than Bhabha, and Bhabha had more international exposure in some sense than Saha. Okay, so this is just a photograph taken in 1938. This was published in the book on Saha in 2019. This is Subhash Bose and Saha together, along with the industries ministers of the then states. Elections are held in India in 1936. So many states had ministries, and these are the industries ministers with Saha and Bose. So, okay, so now let's come to the meat of the talk, and that is the Bhabha stay at Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. So the Britain declared war on Germany in September of 1939. Bhabha got stuck in Bangalore. Davaji Tata Trust created a reader's position in Bangalore for Bhabha, and planned a series of lectures on cosmic rays to be delivered at the physics department of ISC in the beginning of 1940. So before he commenced his lectures, he set up a meeting with Krishnan at the Indian Science Congress Association annual meeting, which was to be held in Madras in January. And he goes there, meets Krishnan. Meeting was presided by Birbal Sahni, who had been elected FRS in 1936 at that time. So Bhabha meets both Krishnan and Birbal Sahni in that meeting. So the lectures that Bhabha delivered at Bangalore, the news of that spread everywhere, and that made Saha invite Bhabha to give a similar series of lectures in Calcutta, which of course Bhabha did later in the year, and proceedings of that. He also supplied a summary of those lectures to Saha to publish in the Science and Culture. So in the year 1939, Raman had nominated Krishnan for FRS. So that FRS came through in the beginning of 1940, and later in the year 1940, Raman nominated Bhabha for the fellowship, for the election of the Royal Society, and that does happen in the March of 1941. Bhabha got elected as a FRS, and now Bhabha was the FRS. He was promoted to a professor's position, and the invitations of professor's positions started to arrive in Bangalore for Bhabha. So in fact, Raman tried to persuade Bhabha to move to Allahabad, where Saha had vacated his position and he had moved to Calcutta. But all that position is, what the teaching in a university could be, etc., etc. So Bhabha wrote a letter to Krishnan soliciting his opinion. Okay, and then in December 1941, the Japanese did whatever they had to do at the Pearl Harbor, and then they started to move in Southeast Asia, and at some stage they threatened airstrikes on Calcutta, which never happened, but that scared Krishnan and also Bhatnagar. So Bhatnagar decided to move the site for National Physical Laboratory from Calcutta to Delhi, and Krishnan decided to leave his Mahendralal Sarkar professorship at IACS, and he accepted the position at Allahabad, which was vacated by Saha. So 42 it all happened, and in the middle of 42, Bhabha lost his father, and that became a turning point in his life. Bhabha at that time actually was writing a book on particle physics or cosmic radiation, which was to be published in Oxford University Press. The book actually finally never gets published because Bhabha only supplied half of the manuscript and later half never reached there. So January of 43, he delivered the presidential address of the physics section of the annual meeting of the Indian Science Congress Association. So Bhabha used to attend this annual meeting of the Science Congress Association. That is how he was getting to know the community in the country intimately. So June of 43, Bhabha wrote to Pauly. By that time, he had set up a lab for doing cosmic ray research. Actually, he had obtained a grant of 1,200 pounds to recommence the experiments which Millikan had left halfway. Millikan had visited India twice. He was in Bangalore. He flew balloons from Bangalore, Madras, as well as he went as far away as Peshawar. Also from there, he flew those balloons. So there was some data, and Bhabha decided to recommence those experiments in the search for some characteristics relating to the mesons. So that was the title of the grant that was there. I don't know how to remove this. I think something. हाँ इसको रिमूव करो बेटा
Just enter through.
no I can change but this is not going this comes because it comes here also it doesn't allow the last sentences to be okay so no, it's not moving.
Going back.
Yeah. Okay, so I was telling you that 43 is the time when Bhabha had now set up to do experiments at Bangalore, recommencing the work that Millikan has done earlier. And 43 is June of 43, he also receives a gift from Krishnan in the form of Harishchandra as a student to work with him on the theory. So experiments are going on. He has got a bright student. Okay, and it is in that background that proposal is sent. He sends a letter to J.I.D. Tata in August of 43. Okay, trying with the idea of starting an institute for fundamental physics. Okay. So all right, after August, that meeting happens in Calcutta of National Institute of Sciences, okay, as to how to organize research in India after the war. And then A.V. Hill was invited to talk to the Indian scientists. So in January of 1944, Bhabha delivered a lecture in Delhi University and the CSR at that time was located on the campus of Delhi University, and Bhabha's lecture was presided by Ramaswamy Mutliar, who is the one who had got CSR going by identifying Bhatnagar in 1939. So you see now the pieces are falling in place. So in February of 1944, Bhabha consults Rustam Choksi, whom he had known for a very, very long time. Choksi was teaching in Indal College, and he seeks his help or to put up a financial proposal for TIFR for the Dorothy Tata Trust. So, and he seeks only just 45,000 rupees from the Dorothy Tata Trust in the first letter that is sent on March of 12, 1944. Okay, and he had become familiar with, CSR, what CSR was planning. So Bhabha was, of course, planning 5 national labs. So he seeks 10% of the money that was supposed to be spent on NPL as the CSR's support to TIFR. This is the kind of money that he seeks in the beginning. So it is in that background that the proposal gets discussed. So in April of 1944, before A.V. Hill left India, A.V. Hill wrote a letter to Bhabha, sharing with him something he had learned from Saha, that Chandrasekhar can be enticed to return to India. So Bhabha, of course, had known Chandrasekhar at Cambridge. Saha also had known Chandrasekhar before Chandrasekhar went to Cambridge, because Chandrasekhar had presented a paper at one of the annual meetings of the ICSA, and where, of course, Saha was present. So you see, the competition now starts in trying to get people to return to India after the war at their respective institutions. But anyways, Bhabha was smarter. He immediately wrote to Chandrasekhar, and Chandrasekhar accepted the invitation. Only thing he asked was that that the new institute should reimburse his dislocation expenses. So, in the meanwhile, proposal had been submitted, and after the proposal is submitted, Bhabha receives an invitation to write a paper for reviews of modern physics, a special issue of reviews of modern physics, which was being brought out in honor of the 60th birth year of Niels Bohr. So Bhabha submits that paper, and in that paper is Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Physics. TIFR is still to commence, but this paper has this byline, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Physics. A companion to this paper was written for the proceedings of Indian Academy of Sciences, and in the companion paper, the in physics is dropped and it only says TIFR now. So in the meanwhile, Bhabha also received a letter from Paul Dirac, and he said that the mathematics should be an integral part of the new institute, and that is how, right from the beginning, there are two schools, physics and maths, in TIFR. So the first meeting at Council of Management of TIFR happened on May 18th, 1945. That is 2 weeks before the TIFR starts functioning from IISc campus on June 1. And you can see that the Tata Trust gave the 45,000 that Bhabha had asked for. Government of Bombay pitched in with 25,000, and 10,000 was to come from CSIR. So now the institute has commenced. You need people. So Bhabha invited Kosambi and mathematician Levy, who was at that time working in Calcutta, to come and join TIFR. Levy, of course, arrived in 48, but the mathematicians were already in place. And for a physicist, Bhabha chose H.J. Taylor, who was a cosmic ray physicist working in Wilson College. So Taylor accepts to be an adjunct professor at TIFR. So this is one of the first few faculty members for TIFR are got in. So the very next year, CSR gave TIFR a block grant of 75,000, and it was for a chair of astrophysics and also inviting a visiting professor. So this money was specifically got to have Chandrasekhar for TIFR, and Bhatnagar also became once the CSR gave the chunk of the budget, so Bhatnagar assumed a position on the TIFR Council of Management. So Chandrasekhar, of course, in 46 declined to accept Bhabha's offer because Chandrasekhar wanted to come on a leave first, but he learned that he will not get a deputation from Chicago, and that would have meant that he will have difficulty in getting a visa for returning. So he declined the offer. So then in 46 itself, Bhatnagar had created a committee for atomic research within CSR. That is after the war ended and with the two nuclear bombs. So there was this committee for atomic research, and Bhabha was offered the chairpersonship of that committee, and that committee had all its meetings in the Kenilworth building in the initial years. So India becomes independent. 11 days after the Indian independence,
the board for research on atomic energy is created, replacing that the committee. So now there is a board, just as CSR was commenced with a board of scientific and industrial research. Now there is a board for atomic research. So that happens on 26th of August 1947. Many important decisions got taken on 26th of August 1947. That is the day Prime Minister Nehru presided over the CSR meeting as the president of CSR. So many important decisions happened 11 days after the Indian independence, and one of them was the creation of Board of Research in Atomic Energy. So a year later, in 48, Atomic Energy Act was passed by the Indian Parliament, and Atomic Energy Commission gets constituted with Bhabha as the chair and Krishnan and Bhatnagar as its other two members. So Department of Atomic Energy, of course, happens 3 years, 6 years down the line, and Department of Atomic Energy comes into being only in the year 1954. So until the year 1954, all the money for TIFR came via the CSR. CSR was the only government department, so everyone received their money, or the governmental money for research, through this CSR system. We start to receive our independent money only after year 1954. So cosmic rays was the first large experimental activity at TIFR. So Bhabha needed to have more people for this. So he inducted Pyara Singh Gill, who was his competitor during the war years. Bhabha was sending payloads in American bombers. So Pyara Singh Gill had a British plane at his disposal where he was flying his payload. So they were working in competition, but riots started in Lahore. So Gill asked for a position at TIFR, and Bhabha let him join in June of 1947. So P.S. Gill came as a first professor of experimental physics at TIFR. He didn't stay very long, that's another story. But soon after this thing, in 48, Bhabha invited Raja Ramanna, and he arrived in 1949. Then Bernard Peters was in India at Madras flying balloons, and Bhabha invited him to join, and he joined in 51. Then in between, in 47 itself, Bhabha had met K. Chandrasekharan at Institute of Advanced Studies, Princeton, and he invited him to set up a school of mathematics on the lines of School of Physics that he had in mind. And so Chandrasekhar also arrived in 1949. So Ramanna, nuclear physicist, mathematician K. Chandrasekhar, joined him in 49. And later on, Dr. K.G. Ramanathan joined in 53. And then finally, Professor Menon joined, Dr. M.G.K. Menon joined as a reader in the year 1955. So TIFR as a national center. So in 48 itself, the Atomic Energy Research Committee of CSR had envisaged TIFR to be a center for all large-scale experimental research in physics. Later on, in the year 53, Bhatnagar put a proposal in a 27th meeting of the Atomic Energy Commission, and the Commission noted that it had recognized TIFR as the only laboratory of the Commission for Fundamental Research in Atomic Science. So in view of this decision, the Commission would not set up another laboratory of its own for fundamental research in atomic physics. So during the laying of the foundation stone of Colaba campus, all this was revealed by Bhatnagar on 1st of January 1954. So TIFR had moved from Kenilworth to OIC, and when these buildings sort of got commissioned, the TIFR moved to its present premises in the year 1962. So whenever TIFR needed in the initial years, Bhabha would get it as a special grant from CSR. The first hostel also, the money came from CSR. So this is the beginnings of TIFR. So now let's see what was happening in India at that time. So before 1930, before the war, 30 to 38, we all know that C.V. Raman got the Nobel Prize in 1930. And in 1931, C.V. Raman and J.C. Ghosh, who was to succeed Raman later on as the IISc director, they sought the creation of the Advisory Board for Scientific Research. The editor of Nature at that time, Richard Gregory, supported the articulation of Raman and Ghosh, but the government in London as well as the government in New Delhi were not receptive. The Viceroy Lord Wellington, he said in 34 that this cannot be done. So as far as industrial scientific research, so no support was coming from the government. The industrial research, TISCO indeed set up a laboratory in Jamshedpur for control and research laboratory. So this actually is the precursor of the National Metallurgical Lab, which is one of the first CSR labs, which will happen as the time would go by. So it's only the start of the war that the government in London and New Delhi realized the importance of reaching out to teachers, scientists in India to aid the war efforts. So this board, BSIR, as I told you, was commenced in an effort to aid the war effort of the British. So it is in that proposition, but Nagar had moved from Lahore to Calcutta. His lab was taken over by the military, and CSR got into being on September 26, 1942. So in 43, the symposium that was conceived by Saha, everybody was there. So you can see the names who were there. Bhabha had not attended the symposium physically, but he had sent a paper for this, this thing, which was published in the proceedings later. So what did these people discuss? They discussed how should the wartime infrastructure in science and technology be assimilated for peacetime civilian organization, and what should be the overall organization model in science and technology for post-war India. It wasn't clear whether post-war India would have a Commonwealth stature or would have complete independence at that time. All the same, the plan had been all worked out, and the scientists had articulated the need to create a National Research Council for India. What should the National Research Council look like? Okay, all that was also spelled out. The NRC was to plan the main lines of scientific research in accordance with the national needs, and it was supposed to ensure the balanced development of all branches of science with minimum overlapping. So this is what NRC was supposed to do. NRC was supposed to have 4 boards of research: scientific research, agricultural research, medical research, and engineering research. Okay, so everything of fundamental nature is a part of the scientific research. And prior to the war, British were only giving money, little bit of money for agricultural research. So Imperial Agricultural Research Institute had been in place right in the mid-20s. Okay, so the only agricultural research and little bit of money was being given for the meteorological work, work related to weather predictions and so on, or the surveys of India, geological survey of India and so on. There was no support to scientific research elsewhere in the country. So, and what did they seek? The Indian scientists at that time, in the year 44, they only sought 5 crore of rupees to kickstart the support to research in India. And this is 5 crore. That you see the budget that Bhabha was asking from Tata Trust was just 45,000 rupees. First budget of TIFR was just 80,000 rupees. So, and what did Bhatnagar say in that meeting? He said it is abundantly clear that the research will have to be subsidized and encouraged by the state and the people on a very large scale. By people, he meant the corporate houses or the industrialists who had some profits to share. So, A.V. Hill summarized everything in the form of a report which he submitted in August of 1944, summary of this result, this report was published in a 4-page article in Nature of 1945. So this had 24 sections, and these are just the headings of that longish report, and you can see from these headings that everything was covered. Literally everything was covered. And there are specific recommendations. Amongst the specific recommendation was that create an overseas fellowship scheme for training Indians abroad. It is that fellowship scheme which gave India eventually a Korean, which gave India Ram Prakash, Satish Dhawan, Hargobind Khurana. All these people had gone to US and UK on the Government of India fellowship, and then they returned to India. So that report said create aims like institution, monitor population control, and A.V. Hill had said that agriculture is India's most important industry. Okay. Then A.V. Hill report specifically says that India needs first quality brains trained in atmosphere of original research and practical experience. That is what TIFR was supposed to do. It had called for creation of MIT-like institutions. It had supported NRC, and most importantly, it said reduce the gap in the salaries of scientists and the civil servant so as to attract the best mind for academia. This is also a part of the A.V. Hill report, and this is what Bhabha eventually implements. And A.V. Hill report said support universities as science education is the fundamental basis of scientific progress. And after writing all these things, A.V. Hill said in October of 1944 that disaster lies ahead if India's industrial development and national welfare are not immediately attended to. So let me come back to the rest of India at that time. So from 44 to 1956, January of 1944, JRD Tata released the Tata Birla Plan. 1 crore rupees were given to Bhatnagar to create 5 national labs. Sargent Committee gave a report to revamp education. AICT was created. Okay, and reports to create IITs and AIMS also happened at that time. After independence, Bhatnagar became the first Secretary of Education, and Bhatnagar also went on to be the first chairman of UGC in 1953, and UGC Act gets passed in 56. So these are the 5 national labs which got opened parallel to creation of TIFR, and these 5 national labs, okay, 3 of the directors of these national labs were invited from abroad, and they obviously were people of very high stature. 4th lab had Krishnan as the first director, NPL Delhi, and Atmaram, who had been a part of scientific and industrial research prior to the creation of PSIR. He was the first director of CGCRI in Calcutta. So Bhabha's TIFR had to compete with these national labs and the people of reasonably high stature, okay, as the time goes by. After the independence, more labs get created. Birbal Sahni proposes his institute in Lucknow. CDRI was sanctioned in the 26th August meeting of 47. Then Raman proposes RRI, and then Saha has his Institute of Nuclear Physics in 49. Then Mitra had proposed Institute of Radio Physics at Calcutta University, CFTRI. So lots and lots of institutions, okay, get going in the first few years of Indian independence. So IARI, agricultural research was the only thing which was being supported, and BP Paul was the director of IARI as India becomes independent, and BP Paul has been referred as the Homi Bhabha of agriculture. So there were, every field has its own Homi Bhabhas, and all these Homi Bhabhas were competing for the national attention. So Bhabha had also known Mahalanobis very intimately, and this is a letter written by Mahalanobis to Bhabha. I am feeling somewhat disillusioned and fed up with my own generation. Okay, because at some stage everybody is now competing. Okay, and when they compete, then few unpleasant things happen. So this is Bhatnagar addressing the gathering on 1st of January 1954, and Saha was not present on 1st January 1954 at the foundation laying stone of TIFR. All others were there. So, but Nagar didn't live very long. He passed away exactly 1 year later. Saha also didn't very long. He passed away in 16 February 56. J.C. Ghosh, the first director of IIT Kharagpur, moves into Delhi to fill up the vacuum created by Bhatnagar, but he also passes away in 1959. The only person who survives in Delhi aiding Nehru was P.C. Mahanalobis, okay, who remains a member of the Planning Commission for 17 years. And of course, PMS Blackett, who had been inducted by Nehru as an advisor on January of 1947, he continues to be an advisor to Government of India right up to the year 1971. When Blackett had become advisor to Nehru in January 47, Blackett was still not a Nobel laureate. Blackett receives his Nobel Prize only in 1948. So this is a photograph all of you have seen many times. This is Bhabha with Blackett and Bhatnagar. Okay, and so what did Bhatnagar and Bhabha do to reduce the gap between the salaries of the teachers and the civil servants? Bhatnagar, of course, had increased the salaries of all the teachers by 25% when he became first chairman of UGC, and Bhabha picked it up from there. And as the Department of Atomic Energy got created, he gave a proposal of starting a training school where the engineers and the scientists would be inducted as class 1 officers. And he devised this career progression scheme as a personal promotion scheme, assessment scheme for the scientists and the academics in TIFR. And this is how the gap between the salaries of the civil servants and academics started to decrease. And by the time it took for 50 years, but at some stage, a professor's position does become equivalent to that of Joint Secretary in Government of India. That, of course, happened in 1996. But today, IITs have a salary structure which is even better than the civil services in India. So this brings me to the end of my planned presentation. Okay, and I have tried to present a narrative leading to the conception and evolution of TIFR in the earlier years in the backdrop of plans for development of all other fields. Okay, and Bhabha was all the time competing with a large number of people. Everybody received support. Some things evolved faster later, and now you can see India is full of many institutes for whom Bhabha set an example of how to create an institution, okay, which will be envied by everyone. I mean, of course, later on, so many other institutes have come up on the lines of TIFR. To name a few, CCMB came up, NII came up, Ayuka happened. So many other things happened in India. On all the DAE supported fundamental research institute are also modeled in some sense on TIFR. So TIFR did have a head start, as I said in the beginning, by virtue of proximity of Bhabha to Nehru independently, and Bhabha being supported by Bhatnagar. And Bhabha succeeded, and because Bhabha was very careful in selecting his colleagues, giving independence to his colleagues, also nurturing young people by providing what he said, intelligent financial support and proper conditions for work. So this is what has to be sustained, okay, if the TIFR has to march, continue to march. And we just had a wonderful presentation of the vision of TIFR by the present director, and I hope all those things would happen sooner than later. We of course need support, and we need to solicit support beyond the Government of India, because the government today is saying that every institution must identify its benefactors. If TIFR is producing human resource today, this human resource would get employed by the present and the futuristic academic institutions of India. If the futuristic academic institutions of India are going to be sustained by the corporate sector of India, then I think we should put up a proposal or support from the corporate sector of India, because they are going to be the main beneficiary of the produce of TIFR. So while we seek money from the Department of Atomic Energy for expansion of TIFR Colaba campus and creation of TIFR Hyderabad campus, we must simultaneously make proposals and bid to seek corporate sector support on sort of 50-50, 1:1 basis. We have to continue doing well. Thank you very much.